Hi, welcome back to using Terraform with Azure. In the last video, I walked through creating a Terraform module that could be used locally with your configurations. The next step is to publish your amazing module to the Terraform Registry to make it available publicly. In this video, we're going to walk through the requirements and steps to set up a GitHub repository that will host the code for the module. Then we will publish that module to the registry. So let's dive right in. The first thing you should do is familiarize yourself with the Terraform documentation on publishing modules, which will be linked in the description below. This document lays out some of the upfront requirements that need to be taken into consideration before we publish. The first thing we need is a public GitHub repository. The repository needs to be public since we're publishing to the public registry. This is not the case if you're publishing to a private registry, however. Next, the repository needs to follow a certain naming convention. The name must have 3 parts: the word Terraform, then a dash, then the provider, which is the main provider where the infrastructure is getting created. You can use multiple providers in your module, but the provider you use for the name should be where the bulk of your resources are getting created. This will be Azure RM in this demo. Next, after another dash, is the name of the module. This should reflect the type of infrastructure that is getting created. Since my sample module is creating storage accounts, I'll incorporate that into the name. Next, we need to have a description. This will be what people see when browsing this module in the registry, so make it short and direct. The module also needs to follow standard module structure. We've gone over some of those best practices in the previous videos. And finally, there are some tagging requirements, but we'll touch base on that when we get to the GitHub part. Okay, let's start by creating a new public repository on GitHub. Log into GitHub, and under Repositories, click New. For the name, we're going to use the standard that I just mentioned in the documentation. Next, I'll specify the description. Make sure that the repository is set to public, and check off the option to add a README file. I do recommend adding a gitignore file using the Terraform template. This will prevent unnecessary files like state files and lock files from showing up in your commits. Now let's go ahead and click Create Repository. Now, the only thing I would change in the repo at this point is to update the gitignore file. The template doesn't include Terraform lock files, so I'm going to add the following lines to my gitignore. Then I'll just commit the change. Okay, cool. Now that we have the repository, I'm going to clone it down and start adding some code. I created a video that demonstrates how to clone a repository from GitHub with VS Code, so check that out if you need a reference. Now I have my repository cloned locally, and I can see my gitignore. So let's go ahead and start adding some Terraform files. We're going to need the following files for this module: main.tf, versions.tf, variables.tf, and finally outputs.tf. Under versions.tf, I'll have to specify a Terraform block with the required providers. Okay, now save versions.tf. Under main.tf, I'm just going to add the resources from the module in the previous video and save the file. For variables, I'm going to do the same. Except for this demo, I've added some more things like a description and type, since this will be going to the public registry. I want to make sure that the next person who uses this has enough information to use the module. Save variables.tf. Now let's go ahead and add some outputs. I'm going to copy those from the previous lab as well. Now save outputs.tf as well. For the README, I'm just going to leave it how it is. GitHub added the description here when the repo was created. However, if you're publishing a module for public consumption, I highly recommend creating a thorough README file. Now we should have a fully functional module. Now let's go ahead and commit this code and push it to the main branch. Go ahead and click the Source Control tab on the left-hand side of VS Code. In the message box, put a commit message. I'm going to put initial commit. Click on the check mark above the message box to commit these changes. Now click Sync Changes to push those changes to the main branch in the remote repository. When I browse back to my repository in GitHub and hit refresh, we should see the new files that were added. Okay, now that I have my repository set up, there's one more step before I can publish. Going back to the documentation, I had mentioned some versioning requirements. Here we can see that the registry relies on tags to identify module versions. So we will need to create a release tag in GitHub using the required semantic versioning. Back in the GitHub repository on the right-hand side under Releases, click on Create a New Release. Okay, first, let's start with the tag. Click on Choose a Tag. In the text box, put in your initial version. For this, I'm going to put 0.0.1. Then click on Create New Tag on Publish. This will create a tag once the release is published and link it to this commit. Next, we need a release title and description. For this demo, I'm just going to put in initial version. Now we're ready to click Publish Release. Great. So if everything was successful, you should see the details of the new release. Now it's time to publish this module to the registry. On the Terraform Registry, you'll need to log in first using GitHub. I've already done this before, but on your first time, you'll probably need to allow Terraform some public access to your account. Once logged in, go to the Publish link in the upper right-hand corner. Then, click on Module. Here we're given the option to select a repository to publish. In the drop-down, I can see my test repository, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. Next, agree to the terms of use, and then click on Publish Module. Once the module is published, you'll be taken to the documentation page of your new module. Here we can see the same details that we went over in the video on using modules from the Terraform Registry. Let's go ahead and copy the example code from the provision instructions into a new configuration. I already have the Azure RM provider set up in my versions.tf file, so let's go ahead and initialize this folder after saving main.tf. The first thing you should see is that Terraform is now downloading the storage module from the public registry. Okay, let's go ahead and add the required variables for the module. Once the required variables have been specified, save main.tf and run a plan. That's how easy it is to publish a module to the Terraform registry. In the next video, we'll be wrapping up this lab with some additional tips and commands that I may not have covered yet, but I think are still important to know. So make sure to check it out. Thanks for watching.